Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views of myself, Salalo Makudiri. And this morning we're going to be confronting a phenomenon that is sweeping continents and unsettling governments. A wave of youth led protests led by what many are calling Gen Zs, young people, digital natives, who too often get dismissed, but who are now refusing to stay silent. From the streets of Kathmandu to the alleys of Rabat in Morocco, young people are mobilizing. And these uprisings are often leaderless. They often start online first, and they are simple calls of accountability, justice, and dignity. For instance, in Madagascar, there were mass demonstrations over power cuts and water shortages, which ultimately escalated into a political collapse. Another example in Nepal, protests over a social media ban sparked the resignation of a prime minister. On the African continent, in Morocco, health system breakdowns and economic precarity have boiled over into nationwide unrest led by young people. And there's lots of examples of this. Kenya comes to mind. Mozambique, post the elections, also comes to mind. So these are not isolated incidences. They are signals of a generational rapture, a new social contract that is being drafted in streets and on screens. And today we're joined by Patrick Lukusa Kadima, lecturer at Wits Business School, specializing in international law, geopolitics, and multilateral cooperation. To help us peel back the layers, what is fueling this youth surge? How coherent is it? And ultimately, what does it mean for democracy, for states, and for our own future? Here in South Africa, we have the highest unemployment rate, youth unemployment rate in the world. Young people are increasingly becoming discontent with the current state of affairs. There's rampant corruption. Leaders are not doing their jobs. And you can head over to Twitter now and you can get a sentiment, you can get a feel of what young people are saying and feeling. And yeah, I think it's a ticking time bomb. We're only waiting for that to, I don't know, get out of the social media streets and literally be a reality, and we see it and we're interacting with it and it becomes a new reality like we've seen with these other various countries. But we have Patrick now that's joining us over telephone to kind of discuss this, unpack it with us, and as I mentioned, to give us insight on what it could ultimately mean for South Africa. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Always a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you, and good morning to you and your listeners.
No, pleasure's all ours. I think let's jump right into it. You've studied global geopolitics and international cooperation. From your vantage point, how do we assess and situate these Gen Z protest waves here on the African continent, in global patterns, and how they're occurring? Nepal, I think, is the latest one that I think was really taking it to another level. We've seen similar scenes in Madagascar just a few days ago. How are we assessing this wave of young people who are revolting essentially?
In short, or in a nutshell, these protests, these Gen Z protests, display, a grim picture of how the world is evolving. It means that the youth are tired of there not being service delivery, the economy not working. You spoke about unemployment as well on the rise, and therefore they have become discontent, and they feel that the leaders are not doing enough to make sure that these challenges are addressed. Rather, there's been also a lot of corruption taking place, and so on and so forth. And we've seen this in Madagascar recently, and Nepal, as you have said, Morocco as well. If countries such as Morocco, that you thought that as developed as they were and advanced as they were in the continent of Africa, are facing such protests, then it brings to light certain serious questions we have to ask ourselves to say. Are our governments doing enough to alleviate these problems that or challenges that we are facing as a society? But in the bigger scheme of things, it shows how the world economy has slowed down, and there are no solutions between countries to how to navigate, the world economy and ensure that these challenges are addressed.
Most definitely. One thing that is really interesting for me. I took some time to kind of like study these protests in these various parts of the world, and one thing that struck me is the fact that most of these movements are described as leaderless, or they are decentralized, and often coordinated via social media, TikTok, WhatsApp, Facebook, X. What
Yeah.
advantages and risks come with that model of mobilization where there's really no one to hold accountable? They come up in hundreds and thousands, these young people, and saying, yeah, well, this is a sentiment we all share, and there's no leader.
Yeah, very true, very true. It always, I think, from my perspective, it always starts. Like you spoke about decentralization. First of all, we live in an age of social media, as you've said, and therefore, social media has become a very powerful tool to rally people, into protest and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you will find that certain governments that do not like this freedom of expression or freedom to protest will then delve into, when it's time to try to break out, delve into those individuals that have been trying to lead the protest. Yes, it might be decentralized, but I always think there will be always one or two that can be the face of it, either by rallying people on social media or physically and so on and so forth. But the advantage of it being decentralized is that it makes it very difficult to identify a person as a leader, of such protests. So, but like I'm saying, governments will always governments that are against freedom to protest will always try to identify one or two people to say these are the real leaders of this protest.
I want to
Yeah.
bring it a bit closer to home. Right here in South Africa, there's a sentiment, a feeling that post 1994, the leaders, the people who were very, very essential in, making sure that the apartheid regime that I think did a lot of damage, particularly to South Africans of color, ultimately collapses. 30 years on, you have these people now running the country, and it almost feels like there's a discontentment or a disconnect between that generation and the young people who are experiencing the country currently. To what extent do you think we might see something similar right here in South Africa? Because it's almost copy and paste, man. These protests, it's young people that are responding to a generational estrangement of some sort, a sense that older institutions, political parties, or the elites and bureaucracies no longer serve the interests of people, particularly the young people. And you get that sense here at home in South Africa.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to say or foresee because I don't study protests in that way. But what is, the truth is that there is a feeling of betrayal that those that fought, for the liberation of the country and now are in power have deserted, the population and so on and so forth. I mean, you can feel. I mean, you can understand that this feeling stems from the wide corruption that is happening, right, in the state and so on and so forth. And I do not want to speculate as to whether we will see such a protest in South Africa or not, because I don't do that area. But what I know is that there is a need and I think that was what the national dialogue was trying to achieve. Also, that there is conversations that should happen as to where we are, and where are we going, right? And that was one of the tools, I think, or solutions that were put forward to avoid such issues happening in the country. So I think there needs to be conversations amongst different stakeholders to understand where the country is going, how can we solve challenges of inequality, poverty, and so on and so forth.
No, most definitely. I think we're going to end on that note, Patrick. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much.
There you go. That was a lecture at Wits Business School, focusing on international law, global politics, and international cooperation and multilateralism. Patrick Lukusa Kadima. And yeah, I think, painting, I think, a picture that is concerning, especially for a country like ours here in South Africa, where you get a similar sentiment. You get a feel that what's happening across the globe, it's only a matter of time before young people here in South Africa catch on, because there's a restless generation, as I mentioned. It is rising, and in different parts of the world, in these pockets that I think started off as isolated, but as more and more examples start coming out, it feels so coordinated. It feels shared, from Morocco, Madagascar, Nepal, Kenya. Young people are no longer content with just scrolling and just sighing. They are standing up, they are speaking out, and in a lot of these cases, bringing governments to their knees. I mean, Madagascar, perfect example. It started off simple. It was a protest over power cuts, and ultimately it helped, or I want to say helped is the correct word to use, but it aided and triggered a political upheaval. Right now, as we speak, the prime minister of Madagascar is left. Is apparently somewhere in France. The government has collapsed, and it seems like a military movement or a military wing of the state has taken over the country. In Nepal, outrage over a proposed social media ban ultimately also forced the prime minister's resignation. In Morocco, there was a protest over healthcare failures and joblessness, and it ultimately spilled into the streets, and it was chaos. So I'm just thinking to myself, one day, young people here in South Africa are going to go, hey, let's wage a protest against youth unemployment. Let's be heard. Let's raise our voices. We can't just be speaking about this on Twitter and Facebook and, social media, but ultimately the government is not listening. Let's take to the streets. And we know how shutdowns and protests here in South Africa ultimately tend to look like. It's not a pretty picture. It's an interesting new wave of these youth-led protests. They're bold, and they're so well coordinated, leaderless, and challenging political stagnation, something that young people here in South Africa are grappling with. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time. The Gen Zs saying, well, we're here, and we are not our parents. I think that was a slogan that it was used back in Fees Must Fall as one of the banners. We are not our parents. So yeah, it'll be interesting how that pans out, and if ultimately it will spill over here to South Africa. We have Neleke Pinar, who says Gen Zs are going to save the world. I am a Gen Z at heart, and I agree with you, Neleke. You get that sense. You get a feeling that young people are going to change the world, whether it's for the good or the bad. I think that's bound to be seen. And what's concerning is most often than not, these kind of protests that are leaderless, that are young people led, often get hijacked, by other nefarious organizations who, I don't know, wanted to see a collapse of a state. So it's up to government to act, because you do have third forces that are in existence. They do want to see a state collapse for whatever reason. And these kind of protests ultimately become a medium for that. Young people might not intend to have a state collapse and, to have third party forces with whatever nefarious agendas to take over the country. But ultimately, these are young people. There's no political experience to an extent. And they are always people that are lurking in the background to kind of take advantage of these kind of protests. We've seen it here in South Africa, where in I think it was the July unrest. They were essentially criminal syndicates who made sure that they're perpetuating the protest. They're fanning the flames of, those protests. And ultimately, they used that moment to steal, to loot. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple of years, and it'll be interesting to see how young people interact with politics and the current affairs of the day. 1976, 2026, who knows? Going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.